Thank you so much for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. Ahead today, the United Nations Security Council passing President Donald Trump's peace plan for Gaza, with Israel supporting it but Hamas opposing it. And the U.S. warns Hamas it will face severe consequences if it violates the ceasefire. We're going to bring you the story from Jerusalem. Closer to home, the U.S. sending Marines close to the shores of Venezuela with the possibility of putting troops on the ground there. What's the role of God and faith along with medicine when it comes to your healing? We're going to hear from Dr. Marc Siegel from Fox News about his new book, The Miracles Among Us, How God's Grace Plays a Role in Healing. And thousands come to salvation as Franklin Graham preaches the gospel in the South American nation of Argentina. All those stories and more right now on CBN NewsWatch.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
It is Tuesday, the 18th of November. We want to begin this half hour with news that could be a new era in the Middle East as the United Nations votes overwhelmingly to support President Donald Trump's Gaza peace plan. Israel is supporting the plan, but Hamas is opposing it. Paul Petit brings us this look at the reactions and what comes next. He's reporting from Jerusalem.
With the approval of the United Nations Security Council, the authorization of a new International Stabilization Force could deploy inside the Gaza Strip within weeks. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu welcomed the vote and said the plan will lead to peace and prosperity. 13 of the 15 council members backed Trump's Gaza peace plan. Russia and China abstained. Trump celebrated the vote on Truth Social, calling it one of the biggest approvals in the history of the United Nations, and saying it will lead to further peace all over the world.
Despite the pressure of many members of this very council, despite the political theater, the condemnations, and the hypocrisy, Israel stood firm. We did not waver. We prevailed.
The resolution includes Trump's 20-point roadmap for Gaza's future, a plan U.S. Ambassador to the UN Mike Waltz says could chart a pathway to Palestinian self-determination. The Palestinian Authority welcomed the UN decision, but Hamas slammed it, calling it an attempt to impose international trusteeship on Gaza and using force to disarm what it calls the resistance.
And simply put, Hamas is finished in Gaza and does not have a future there. And if they do not follow through, they are in violation of the ceasefire and will face consequences, severe consequences.
President Trump is also strengthening security ties with Saudi Arabia, announcing he's prepared to approve the sale of F-35 fighter jets to the kingdom, a first in the region outside Israel. Israel has not opposed the sale, but wants a key condition attached, aimed at normalizing relations between the two countries.
My view is that we should not provide America's most advanced aircraft, a fighter jet, to a country that refuses to recognize our best and most reliable ally in the Middle East, and that is Israel.
Today, President Trump welcomed Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to the White House. Paul Petit, CBN News, Jerusalem.
And our CBN News Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell is joining us now from Jerusalem to continue our coverage. So, Chris, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu welcomed the United Nations vote. What will this stabilization force look like in real practice?
Well, according to the resolution, they're supposed to secure the border areas, key crossings, and they protect humanitarian operations along the corridors and oversee civilian populations and overseeing the assistance and disarmament and demilitarization of Hamas, and then destroy the military infrastructure. Whether or not that actually happens remains to be seen. There's supposed to be a transitional governance that will be set up that will lead to what's called the border peace, and that's referenced in the resolution. And then that would link the security and the government to a wider pathway toward a Palestinian, what they call self-determination and statehood. The U.S. and then the Israeli military, the IDF, would progressively withdraw from Gaza as the ISF takes over. But we'll see what happens. This is all tied to certain standards and milestones and timeframes. But will it be a peacekeeping force? Will Hamas be disarmed? Or will the ISF actually be a peace-enforcing force that will take and disarm Hamas? Some people, that really is going to be a fantasy for some of the Muslim Arab nations to actually go ahead and do that.
Making headlines here is the sale of F-35s to Saudi Arabia. What's the reaction by some there in Israel?
Well, there are many people are concerned about the F-35s, and in addition to a civilian nuclear program and also a U.S. security pact, a sort of a NATO-style pact with Saudi Arabia. And then what a lot of people's attention is the sale of maybe as many as 48 F-35s. What some people believe that what it could do is threatens Israel's QME. And what is a QME? It's the qualitative military edge that was begun by U.S. law in 2008. And that was Israel's ability to defeat any credible conventional military threat from any individual or a possible coalition of states. And what people are saying here is Saudi Arabia, it still boycotts Israeli products, makes hostile demands on Israel, and it's conditioning its relations with Israel on establishing a Palestinian state that many could see could be an existential threat to Israel. So the sale of the F-35s can be very problematic, especially if the regime in Saudi Arabia changes. Right now, it could normalize relations with Israel. But what about a future Saudi regime that could be hostile to Israel with maybe 48 F-35s?
There has been talk about partitioning Gaza. Is that still a possibility?
It really does seem so. And right now, there is a de facto partition. Israel maintains control over 53% of the Gaza Strip. Hamas controls the rest. So we'll see if anybody's going to be able to go in there to disarm and demilitarize Hamas. It's not an easy task. Unlikely that any Arab or Muslim force is going to go in there. And the IDF chief of staff just said a couple of days ago the IDF would be there to enforce Hamas to disarm. But without that right now, Ephraim, we still have a status quo of IDF in control of its part of the Gaza Strip and Hamas in control of the rest.
Chris, this plan opened the door for a Palestinian state. What are Israeli officials saying about that now? The plan has passed in the United Nations.
Well, we had a quote in Paul's report from UN ambassador from Israel, Danny Danon. He also said later that there would be no Palestinian state. He agrees with the security pillars of the plan, but not Palestinian statehood. Prime Minister Netanyahu has come out against a Palestinian state. There's been a poll just came out yesterday. 70% of Israelis oppose a Palestinian state. That's the highest level since the war began. And many people believe it's really a fantasy that the ISF is going to disarm Hamas. And in all of this, what this does is bringing pressure from these Arab Muslim states for a Palestinian state, puts Israel in a political and a military bind. But it seems, I think, here there's no appetite, Ephraim, for a Palestinian state that would put many people believe Israel under an existential threat.
Chris, what are the current views of the Palestinian Authority?
Well, what the resolution does say, it says it's going to operate. The Palestinian Authority will implement required reforms. Many people have seen that historically. Those reforms rarely happen. And Itamar Marcus, I talked to him earlier today. He says the PA is fundamentally a terrorist entity. It promotes the idea of killing Jews is what Allah wants. And Israel is facing a religious war if the Palestinian Authority is given statehood in Gaza or anywhere else in Judea and Samaria.
Before we let you go, give us a preview of what's ahead today on Jerusalem Dateline.
Well, we have updates on the latest. We have a story by Paul Petit on how the BBC, its reporting on Israel has been exposed as extremely biased. We have a story by Hostage Therapy. You know, we're rejoicing that many of these hostages have come out, but they go through a lot of therapy to get back to a normal life. And a story by the Deaf Association and how CBN Israel is partnering with the deaf here in Israel.
All right, our CBN News Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell, thank you so much for your insights. Looking forward to hearing from you in the days ahead this weekend. I want to remind you at home, you can always get the latest from Jerusalem Dateline at 8 p.m. Eastern. You can find it on the CBN News channel. You can also find it on the CBN News app, or you can find it on YouTube as well. Closer to home, the situation in Venezuela is heating up. Thousands of U.S. Marines are now some 15 miles off the shores of Venezuela as the Trump administration threatens to possibly put troops on the ground. CBN's Wendy Griffith has this story.
President Trump told reporters he's open to talks with President Nicolas Maduro, but military action remains an option.
I don't rule out anything. We just have to take care of Venezuela. They dumped hundreds of thousands of people into our country from prisons.
The world's largest aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald Ford, is now in the Caribbean as part of what's being called the largest military presence there in decades. It comes as the U.S. conducts airstrikes on alleged drug boats. The administration says it has so far destroyed over 20 vessels and killed more than 80 people. The president says Maduro is responsible for the intervention.
He's done tremendous damage to our country, primarily because of drugs.
Brad Bowman, senior director of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, told CBN's Faith Nation why he believes President Trump is flexing America's military might.
The president, at a minimum, is trying to cast a shadow of power, if you will, over the negotiating table to get concessions from the Maduro regime. And he may be preparing for additional military action. But it remains to be seen whether they will conduct strikes inside Venezuela, which would be both legally and politically a much more serious step than what we've already seen with the interdiction of these drug boats.
Venezuela's government alleges the real reason behind the U.S. military force is regime change.
I think what he'd like to do is get Maduro out, convince Maduro you're done. You were illegitimate. You stole the election. You don't belong there. You're engaging in narcotics. You've caused a ruckus. You should leave.
Meanwhile, Venezuela says it's open to dialogue, even as Maduro ordered a massive military call-up of his own, some 200,000 troops, while publicly calling for peace. Wendy Griffith, CBN News.
Coming up, still on the subject of military conflicts, the Secretary of War is pushing to speed up the production of U.S. weapons. We're going to hear why he says it is so important when we come back. You're watching CBN NewsWatch. The Pentagon is hitting the reset button on how America builds its weapons. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth says the country can't afford continued delays or red tape as global threats rise. He's calling for quicker production and demanding more from defense contractors. CBN's national security correspondent Caitlin Burke has the details.
Secretary Hegseth says the Pentagon can't keep relying on a slow peacetime approach to building weapons. He wants a system built for speed, one that delivers capabilities as quickly as threats emerge.
Our objective is simple: transform the entire acquisition system to operate on a wartime footing.
Hegseth says that starts with tearing up decades of Pentagon red tape and making weapons delivery the priority, even if the systems aren't flawless.
By taking greater calculated risk in how we build, buy, and maintain our systems, we will gain speed to more quickly provide capabilities to the battlefield.
These changes come in response to what's seen as a defense production crisis. Multiple international conflicts exposing weaknesses in the U.S. industrial base, slowed down by factory backlogs, supply shortages, and a depletion of skilled workers. This new model leans heavily on buying commercial products off the shelf that can be quickly adapted for military use.
Imagine being able to swap parts or software of a critical munition without needing to, completely redesign the missile. It's common sense, but we're not doing it.
Brian Clark, a senior fellow with the Hudson Institute, says this would upend how major defense contractors have worked for decades. But he points out the old way of doing business is unable to keep up with today's threats.
If you're only able to tap into the defense industrial base, it's only big enough to support your peacetime needs because you're not going to pay extra money to have extra factories sitting around idle. But if you have commercial suppliers that have other customers and other things they're doing, you can spin them up in wartime to be able to deliver the kind of weapons and airplanes and ships and things you need for the wartime need. Sort of like we did World War II, where a lot of commercial factories were repurposed for military production.
Experts agree this shift is key if the U.S. wants to retain its advantage on the battlefield.
We don't have that luxury of time anymore. So we have to continually be adapting to prepare for the kinds of threats that are emerging on an almost weekly basis from our overseas rivals and adversaries.
Conflicts in both Eastern Europe and the Middle East are providing real-time feedback on U.S. systems, highlighting what works and what's become obsolete.
We are at war, at least at arm's length, right? So our systems are being used in Ukraine to go fight the Russians. And then in the Middle East, the Navy would say we definitely were at war over the last year because they faced the most intense air battles since World War II from the Houthis and the Iranians, which that was a wake-up call for them to say even these relatively small actors can access commercial technology and make very effective weapons that will stress out our high-end missile defense systems, which performed very well.
If these reforms work, experts predict we'll see programs launched more frequently and canceled faster, with smaller firms competing alongside defense giants. Because in modern warfare, speed is survival, and the U.S. can no longer afford to operate at a peacetime pace. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Washington.
Still ahead, how faith and medicine work together. We're going to hear about how God's grace can play a role in healing right after this. While doctors can see scientific explanations in almost everything, there are moments when faith overcomes all odds. On this week's Healthy Living, Dr. Marc Siegel, author of the book The Miracles Among Us, shows us how God's grace plays a role in healing. He's talking about the moments when faith plays that key role.
I thought I was going to write about medical miracles, but I ended up writing about miracles in general, because it turns out, as you pursue the stories of miracles, that they're more common than you thought, that we've all had one, that they're not medical specifically, but they may be coincidences wrapped in medicine, things that occur that accrue. That's what a miracle is. My publisher, who's phenomenal, has said to me repeatedly, identify the main miracle in each chapter. And I'd say to her, well, you know, Lisa, it's hard to say. They're compounding on each other. And that, I call it now, and I didn't call this in the book, I call it now a miracle lane. You know you're in the miracle lane. You know that you're in the coincidence lane where that's happening. And so having faith and having positive feeling and courage and resolve and resourcefulness, all of it builds. And you end up, I believe in bringing together the idea of prayer and great medicine, prayer and great technology. And as Cardinal Dolan said to me, you don't receive the miracle you're asking for all the time. Oftentimes, all the time, you receive the miracle that God wants you to have. And I use two biblical stories from that in my book, in a chapter from the Holocaust where a really unfortunate individual is praying on Yom Kippur, and he's strung up by Hungarian soldiers for prayer. And then in the end, he freezes through the night, and they put him in the hospital, which is a miracle in and of itself. And in the hospital, they don't amputate his arm. That's gone. That's necrotic. They literally let it get worse and worse, and then use a towel for anesthesia. This is all reminiscent of the atrocities we are experiencing now with Hamas, which I have another chapter on. And anyway, the point is, here's when the miracles start to occur. It isn't in the medical part, although survival was a miracle. The miracles start to occur because he starts to pray again, and he says one of the most holy prayers we have, the Shema. And at the end of it, when he says the Lord is one, the Allies hit the hospital with bombs, and everybody's killed in this hospital but him. He escapes in Hungarian soldier clothing and goes to Budapest. They take him for a Hungarian soldier, And he's fed first rations, and he makes it through the war. When the Allies come, they almost mistake him for a German soldier because he's speaking fluent German, and they practically kill him. But just in the nick of time, they realize who he is, that he isn't, that he's a Jew, and they save him. And so the question is, why is he saved? And he's saved because later on, he becomes a great rabbi and a great, what's called a mashgiach, looking to kosher food. And it looks like God had a purpose for him. That's why God saves Hannah, who's praying for a son that she's never had. And the son that he gives her is Samuel, who ends up being a great prophet.
Once again, the book is called The Miracles Among Us, How God's Grace Plays a Role in Healing. You can hear more from its author, Dr. Marc Siegel, by watching this week's edition of Healthy Living. You can find it on the CBN News channel at 2:30 and 8:30 Eastern. You can also see it on the CBN News app, and it's available on YouTube as well. Coming up, Franklin Graham takes the gospel to Argentina with thousands coming to Christ. We're going to bring you that story when we come back. You're watching CBN NewsWatch. The good news rang out in Buenos Aires, Argentina recently. Nearly 75,000 people came for a two-night outreach by the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association. The ministry partnered with about 2,500 churches from all parts of the city. Franklin Graham preached a message of God's love and salvation through repentance and faith. More than 9,000 people made the decision to give their life to Christ. Beautiful. Time now for your Tuesday Tweetable. I pray this message blesses you, and I hope you'll post, tag, tweet, and share it with those in your circles of influence. God's promises are true. You can bank on them regardless of what the circumstances look like. Trust Him in the process of getting to the promises with that word and God's promises. Make this a terrific Tuesday, and be sure to have yourself a wonderful rest of the week. Well, that will do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. I want to remind you, you can always get more of our news programs on the CBN News channel. You can find them there at any time. You can also find them online. That address is cbnnews.com. We'd love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today or any day. You can email us, newswatch@cbn.com. You can also reach out and touch us on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Of course, that's formerly known as Twitter. Again, make it a terrific Tuesday and come right back here and join us again tomorrow. We look forward to seeing you then. Goodbye. God bless. Thank you so much for watching.